Hi guys, Luton here, and welcome back to some Battlefield 4 Siege of Shanghai Conquest, and how appropriate this map and game mode today for my topic today, which is of course first release impressions and how important that is. Now, I was lucky as well to team up today with some great players. We've got Mantis 701, Snoov 603, Jake in the Works Media, Scanner Barkley, and of course Jack Frags down there as well. So this was a great game mode. I believe Chalk1 was also on the map on this one today. So real good team, and we were sort of having some awesome gameplay throughout the games that we played this evening. Now, this is a full round of Siege of Shanghai Conquest, and we'll talk a bit about the game mode as we play through at the same time. But really, as I say, the topic for today, first impressions. Now, first impressions are more important than ever before now, and what we're talking about is, releasing with strong foundational gameplay and, good map design, level design. Of course, it matters a little bit about the game's genre and all of this kind of thing, because, different games, different situations, some of those things aren't going to be as appropriate as others, depending on if it's a single player. So we're not talking about an industry-wide situation, but within FPS multiplayer, for sure, these things are of critical importance, and with the release of Titanfall coming up, it's going to be a sure thing that all eyes are going to be on that release, how it goes down, how strong it is, how is the foundation gameplay, is it perfect, is it what people are expecting, is it, do you get a good direct mechanical feel from the game and you really feel sucked in there, or is it kind of just a bit meh, it doesn't really sort of play out too well, how is the netcode? All of these things so very important. I mean, at least with DICE and this month with Battlefield 4, Player Appreciation Month, they're sort of giving a nod in the right direction. As I talked about in the video previously, although they have actually released these kits previously at the same kind of period, they're definitely throwing, the battle packs alone over the entire month, that's giving a lot of stuff back again. And, you kind of say, like, what would you have me do? They're doing their best to kind of improve things. We're going to be very curious to see how this patch goes down and so on and so on. But it's kind of beside the point at this time, It's like once the horse has bolted, there's no point shutting the stable door. All right, it's too late. The damage has been done. The player base has been kind of alienated to an extent. There's obviously like the dedicated hardcore players and those people who simply don't care. But there's going to be a lot of, there's going to be a high percentage of players, and let's not forget as well new players. This is the other thing. A lot of people that were very pissed off are probably sort of the main kind of Battlefield core players as well, who had high expectations. But I'm absolutely certain, there's a large percentage there of players who came in new, were expecting this amazing thing. They maybe had played other games, hadn't played Battlefield before, and were thinking, oh wow, this game looks amazing, this is definitely going to be the thing for me. Now, I would personally still say that I think Battlefield 4 is amazing. I mean, just from some of the games that I played this week, and I was playing with Mantis and a couple of the other guys there. We were playing some domination rounds, and I remember it was on Paracel Storm Domination. We were playing that round, and there was one point where the whole building basically exploded. I don't talk about like the building coming down, but about literal explosions happening around me, and I was in the middle of it, and I was still shooting some guys at the same time, and I literally went, holy Christ, I said it's a really amazing thing that even when a game has been out for a while, it can still have that impact, because, like I've said about Titanfall, I question the longevity of that game. I question whether it's going to have that exciting feel months into the game. Well, here we are months into Battlefield 4, and it's still having that effect on me. I still can have, not all the time, obviously, but you still will have moments where something happens, and you go, Jesus, man, like, it's all coming down, and there's like a tank driving through it, and you go, oh man, it's all going on. So, that's what I mean. It still has all those elements to it, but at the same time it's still so unbelievably important for those first impressions. Those first impressions count so much. I mean, imagine how many new customers you may have for a title and for a series who come in off of the back of a huge release like Battlefield 4. I mean, it was a massive release, okay? So much information, so much hype, so much PR, and you have all of that, all of those new players coming in. Now, the trouble is, new players are going to be 100% more critical than, old school Battlefield crowd in terms of the foundational gameplay. Not the overall feel and some of the details of the game, but the foundational gameplay, right? And the reason for this is that, older Battlefield players, they will have kind of different sort of mindsets, different opinions about things, because overall they're kind of already sold on the Battlefield brand in many ways. Players like myself, I'm already sold on the brand. I still, there's all these things I love about it. So, when it comes into the game, the foundational gameplay is of course really important to me. I want to have that kind of solid mechanical feel. I want to have it direct. I don't want to turn a corner and put like 10 rounds down on a target and nothing happens, which has happened to me already this week. I don't want to have that kind of stuff. But again, in fact, this goes in many ways to explaining why some of you have been confused by my comments in the past, actually, if I can kind of explain this a little right now, because I think a lot of people in the past have been like, oh, but aren't you fussed by this and blah blah blah, and thinking that I've been sort of too positive. Whoa, what the hell was that? I mean, a perfect example right there. What the hell was that? I was just standing there and then I get blown back 10 feet. What happened there? I don't know, but all these things I'm kind of like, yeah, okay, but the kind of overall impact, I'm looking more at the kind of gameplay experience as a whole. So I'm kind of feeling about the teamwork, the way some of the mechanical feel there, the elements, the look and feel, all of this kind of stuff. So kind of these little bits and pieces, and they kind of happen here and there, and it doesn't sort of feel too much of a critical problem. As I said before, though, the problem is the inconsistency. I know people love me saying this, inconsistency in the game, because for me, like I've said, I have had these issues, but overall I don't seem to notice it that much, but then other players have had it and they can't even get into the game. That's obviously unacceptable. If you were having that kind of experience where you can't even play, that is absolutely totally unacceptable, and the game should not be in anywhere that situation. But again, people have different things. Sometimes it's not entirely the game, sometimes there's other stuff going on there as well. But anyway, the point is that players who have been around for a while and kind of enjoyed the series and they're kind of embedded into it are going to have a different viewpoint than these people where their first impressions count so much, because you will have players come into the game that have an expectation, and if that foundational gameplay isn't there for them, they won't see the other things, because that kind of core aspect will be so frustrating that they won't be able to kind of get past it and see into the other things. I actually feel like that's what's happened a lot with Battlefield 4. I often feel like that's kind of why so many people have kind of been onto those kind of things, because they are important, but I think a lot of players have kind of got onto that kind of stuff because of the fact that they maybe have come into the game anew, and so it's the only thing they kind of see, because they see that issue, those problems right there, and then the other stuff, which is awesome as well, but in many ways subsidiary, it doesn't kind of become highlighted enough. So this is just a point as to why it's so important for that, core aspect, the first impression of the gameplay, to be there. It's why it's really, really important, really critical for people. Because if you don't have that, you alienate an entire possible player base. I mean, these are people that are coming in new to the game. They could potentially be like a whole new generation of Battlefield players. And in one fell swoop, by just having that kind of aspect missing, having that sort of foundational gameplay not there, it kind of really, really can be a terrible thing in the long term for the title. Not to mention the fact that it builds that insane amount of cynicism, and it can end up kind of being almost labelled, for years to come. I mean, DICE are going to be developing the new Battlefront game, so I mean, imagine when that is coming around and there's going to be all the release around that, there's going to be guaranteed there's going to be a huge element of doubt and sort of people being very kind of pessimistic, cynical. Oh, this, we've had this before, blah blah blah, will they get it right this time? So there's a whole aspect there as well. From that point of view, that's going to be a really big problem. It's going to be a really big problem for EA, it's going to be a really big problem for DICE, whether they like to sort of think that that's actually going to happen. And I'm not one for wanting to sort of beat down on people, but it really will be an issue, because people are going to just automatically assume that same problem. They're going to sort of make that link there, whether it's true or not, they're going to make that link. And so these, the first impressions, it's so important, not just for that game, but for continuing titles into the future as well. It's going to have a knock-on effect. It's going to have a knock-on effect for their next title, probably the title after that, because when these things get banded around and continue on for so long, the gaming community will attach stigma to it. It's happened with other titles before. It's happened obviously with consoles before. Look at the Xbox and all the kind of ridiculous stigma around that with its Red Ring of Death. And in fact, I still find that situation so funny. The fact that the Red Ring of Death stigma amongst gamers became so severe that Microsoft, when they redesigned the Xbox, actually took the ring off of it, just so that people couldn't call it the Red Ring of Death anymore. And so this is the thing, within the gaming community, stigma will be attached, and it will go on for years and years and years and years. So we have perhaps not even seen the overall impact that Battlefield 4 will have, just going on and on and on. And so, it just really highlights that the first impression of a game, it's not important just for that release of the game. It's important for the credibility and for the security of other titles going forward. And I actually said this in the past at the time as well. I've said this before, that, DICE itself, people go on about how the devs don't care, or that they must have known that this was the situation for the release. I say, how can you possibly think that? How can you be really that sort of, ignorant and blinded to think that that would be the case? Because from DICE's point of view, having a release like this, I mean, the idea as well, this is what I mean, the idea that people can be so kind of blinkered to think that a dev only cares about sort of selling that product and getting it out there. Of course they want to sell the product. That's what they do as a company, alright? That's an entirely stupid statement to make, alright? Of course they want to sell the product. Of course they want to sell the title. Of course they want to sell premium. Of course they want to sell DLCs. They're a company and a business. That's what they do, okay? But to assume, to say as gamers and as Battlefield players that like, oh yeah, they don't care. They just wanted to get the product out there, get our money, and then they don't care. That is the stupidest thing to say. Because this title and the sort of impact that it has from a kind of social point of view on the community will remain for years and years. The stigma, like I've said, is attached to it, and gamers will just kind of assume that going forward into any other titles. It will have a knock-on effect for other titles as well. So the impact of the game goes far beyond just Battlefield 4. And, that's why it's so ridiculous to assume that they don't care about it, or that they don't want to fix it, or that at release and all this kind of stuff. Now, questionably, like people have said, we don't know what kind of, we don't know what kind of pressure DICE will have been under from EA in terms of releasing it at a certain time. We just don't have that information. We don't know the kind of conversations that have been on there. We don't know the deadlines that were put in place and, enabled. We just don't know that stuff. But it could well be that this has been a terrible decision from whatever level it was made, because it will have a long-term impact. And we've also seen that EA obviously tried to make some kind of retraction when they were making it. I was so lucky. I was thinking, oh man, we're going to get away with this, and then right at the end, bam, in comes a missile. Tried to save it as well. But yeah, when they tried to make their statement about DLCs being put onto hold, oh god. I really thought I was going to get away with that. Anyway. Yeah, the DLC's on hold. Now, while everybody else was freaking out, going, there's going to be no DLCs, I just said, look, I'm pretty sure that this is just a PR point of view. I'm pretty sure that there's going to be no issues with the DLC. And sure enough, a day or two later, they kind of backpedaled a little bit and said, no, there's going to be the DLCs. We just were sort of saying that we're focusing on getting things fixed up. But nonetheless, it was kind of an interesting thing that they actually felt the necessity to make that statement, to come out and say, look, we totally realise there's an issue here, we're going to get on, we're going to fix it. So that was a big deal for me, for the publisher to actually come out and say that, because it's not that often that that kind of thing happens, once the game has been released. Often people will kind of, they'll make the fixes, but to all intents and purposes, they'll kind of say, yeah, working as intended, just because it's better to kind of go on with that, rather than sort of admit failings or that there's an issue, because they know that once people get hold of that, they'll run with the fact that it's been said. So they kind of try to sort of say, no, it's all good, and then they hope that things will just get fixed as a matter of course. But the fact that they actually kind of said that was pretty much an admission that it's causing them big issues, and probably having some kind of impact on the financiary as well. But you see, this is what I said at the time. Remember I said a little while back that, if people really want to have some kind of impact on the game and the developer and the publisher, and actually make them aware that you're not happy with this situation, that voting monetarily with your purchases is much more of an impact than just ranting. Of course they will read sort of forums, feedback, videos and all this kind of stuff, but actual the bottom line, that's where they will really take note, the bottom line. And as I say, this is going to be felt going forward into future releases. Now I'm very, very curious to, it's going to be almost impossible to ever really know this, but I would be very curious to know, had Battlefield 4 had a much, much smoother release, what kind of impact that will have on those initial sales figures from Titanfall. Now we're not ever going to really be able to know that, but it's a curious thing to think about, the idea that if Battlefield 4 had been a stronger release, if it had been really solid from the start, would that have sold Titanfall better? I'm absolutely sure there would have been a very significant percentage there that it would have done. And so this is what I'm saying again, is that, it goes beyond just the one company and their own sales. It has a knock-on impact for other titles as well. And this kind of brings me on to my next point, which is about the kind of general situation we are in right now within gaming. Now, I was talking this week that as a gamer, there's more games now available really than ever before, and quality games at that. It used to be that you would have kind of a primary game, and then you may have a couple of other titles going along at certain times, and you'd go, oh yeah, I'll play this and this, you get those done, and then the next thing comes along, so you could kind of continually go along. right now there are so many titles coming out, good quality titles. I almost can't find the time to play them. I'm going like, oh yeah, well, this is going to be really awesome, and this is great, oh my god, and now this is coming. You don't know what to play, and this has multiple effects. For one thing, it means that people are going to be much more sort of flippant about just turning away from a title. You know, it used to be that, you know, you'd have like a solid title and that was your thing to play. Well, you would kind of go, well, you know, it's got some issues, but it's my game, it's what I love, so I'm just going to get on with it, alright? But nowadays, that's not really the case. You don't need to be that dedicated. Of course, there are going to be titles that people are 100% committed to. You're always going to have that hardcore base. But from an overall point in the community, people are going to be much more sort of happy and willing, like it's no skin off their nose, you know, to sort of turn away and go, well, whatever, I'm just going to go play this. You know, there's so many more options out there for people now. And again, this has just a major impact on people in the game. And, you know, I'd be curious to hear what you guys think about sort of what other titles are going on there. I mean, Arma 3, for example. I've been playing a lot of Arma 3 in the last few weeks. It has a totally different style entirely to Battlefield 4. But I just kind of felt more sort of appeal there in some ways. I'm still loving the Battlefield. Like I said, I got on and had some amazing games this week. But it just shows, you know, there's plenty of other games out there for people to play. And that's what comes back to the first impression. You know, you have that first impression because if it's not a good first impression, that sticks in your mind. Even when things are being fixed, you still have that in the back of your mind of like, you know, it's never what I expected. And that's really, really a bad thing. It just kind of really, the whole point of today is just the weight and the importance of that first release. And I think it's starting to have an impact. Not to mention the whole fact of the kind of philosophy and the style of gaming is changing. We're seeing so many more free-to-play games now as well, and that's bound to have an impact again, because just that totally different style of release, that kind of transparency often. Free-to-play games rely very heavily on the communication with the community. They rely very heavily on being able to kind of continually update, fix, improve, and have that conversation going on there. Whereas the more kind of standard model of games, which is more like Battlefield 4, they don't have that. Everything is closed, it's behind closed doors, there's no transparency, there's no conversation. And so often that can be a bad thing. People's imagination is always worse than the reality. And if they don't have that kind of rationale there, people will just start speculating. Lord knows I do that. And so, you know, it kind of can almost exacerbate a problem way beyond what it should be. That's often not a good thing as well. I mean, you only have to look at titles like Star Citizen, which are coming up here, to see the fact that, you know, the first impressions for that game so far have been really good. The game's not even out, it's nowhere near out, but so far people are loving it just because of the level of communication and involvement they're having with the community, the level of sort of transparency that they're posting out there, where they show the entire development process. They're doing studio tours, even though we're not even in anywhere near kind of alpha stage right yet. They're really sort of getting involved in a massive way with their community, because they understand that the community is the core sort of foundation for the game and for them. It's so important for them to sort of hit the ground running with that, because, you know, that's what they're selling their whole product on. And as I say, it does go in with free-to-play games. Now obviously Star Citizen is not a free-to-play game, but the principle there with free-to-play is very, very similar. You know, they rely on that community base being there, so because it's a free game, again, people don't have any kind of real literal investment until they start doing microtransactions. So the first release impression for a free-to-play game is going to be really, really, really important. Now, here's another thing, okay? Alphas and betas. Now, I know many people always, this is almost the kind of go-to answer when people say, how could you have improved the Battlefield 4 release? And people always say, well, if it had a longer beta period, then, you know, and people could have got involved right there, we would have absolutely had a better release. I don't entirely agree with that. I do agree that to some extent it's going to improve, because for sure you're going to have the ability to kind of look at what's happening in certain situations and so on and so on. But here's the problem. Arma 3 had a massively long beta and alpha period, really, really long, okay, and everybody could get involved in that, they could get on board with that. Was the game perfect when it released? Did it have everything when it released? No. Arma 3 is still, like, glitch beyond belief, and like there's so much crazy stuff that happens in Arma 3 that's just absolutely insane. I mean, we were talking the other night about this, and I'm like, how come Arma 3 doesn't get all the negativity? You know, Arma 3 is like so off the wall in terms of its glitches and problems. It's just ridiculous almost. But again, you don't play it because of that. You play it because it has this almost kind of unique sort of style to it as the milsim, so you kind of don't mind it. And also, the community is used to that kind of stuff now, so they kind of laugh it off. It's like, oh yeah, it's armor. They kind of just get on board with it in many ways. Whereas with Battlefield, it's always kind of sold itself as this quality product, which I believe in many ways that it is, okay, but again, it's sort of, people have that different mindset, so they have different expectations. In some ways, this is where hype and PR can really fall down and almost kind of damage the product, because if the hype and PR is so strong and in many ways over the top, I mean, for example, okay, classic example, the Battlefield trailers for DLCs. Battlefield trailers for DLCs, love them, because they always make you really hyped and excited, and you see them and you go, oh man, Battlefield, you get really excited for it. But everybody knows, you see those situations in Battlefield for the trailers and stuff where there's like a Jeep going along a road and the guy on the back is like shooting a machine gun at a helicopter that's chasing it down the road, and you're kind of like, yeah, that's going to happen in like 1 out of every 1,000 games I play. It doesn't give an accurate representation of the game. And I actually think that's a real problem, because it almost missells the product. They show like this ultra thing going on, and then that isn't kind of, people get in the game and it's like not what they expected. And that kind of is really a fantastic analogy for the whole thing, and we come back to another point as well, which has been talked about tons and tons, which was the whole kind of release and sort of what people had covered and the content there within. This also ties in with the beta. With the beta, with a beta even, there's only so much that you can really test compared to a live full release, because the amount of players is just nowhere near in terms of stress testing and all this kind of stuff. So it's just not going to have the same kind of impact. Of course, it will give you some valuable information, but it's not anything that you can compare to a live full release. It just doesn't, it's not the same thing. So you can't kind of see those kind of things. And as I say, the thing that makes me laugh a lot is when people are sort of saying about YouTubers or press and PR people going to events and seeing the game first, and then everybody saying things like, oh well, you played it, so you must have known that these issues were there. And it's like, yeah, but all of these events are always LAN. So there is no netcode issue. There's never a netcode issue. And netcode and server problems are the 90% problem that I see people ask out. Like I've said before on Twitter, I've posted up on Twitter saying what's the major issue that you're having with the game. 90% of people say server or netcode. And this is the thing, is like when people have been testing, or for example if you're at Eurogamer and you got to play the Battlefield 4 at Eurogamer, it's all LAN, so you never see any netcode, you never see any server problems, and even then, so these kind of things just don't come up. So instead everybody comes away talking about the other aspects, which is the kind of look and feel and the overall kind of enjoyment gameplay. What the hell was I doing there? I really should have spun 180 instead of like not doing anything at all. That was a terrible death. But anyway, so looking at the long term, Battlefield 4 is going to have a big impact to play on other things. It's really, I think we've only really seen the tip of the iceberg in many ways. I mean, people feel like it's been really bad to this point in time, and like, oh, it's been bad for their sales and all this kind of thing. The sales of Battlefield 4 is one thing. The sales of titles over the next 3 to 5 years is an entirely different thing. And as I say, in many ways, that's almost a situation that you can't quantify. You can never know really what kind of percentage impact that's going to have on sales for the future, but it's going to have some impact, and there's nothing you can do about it at this point. There's nothing that you can do, because it's happened, it's out there, the stigma is attached, and the player base for a certain percentage is going to be alienated. There's nothing you can do, and no amount of shiny battle packs is going to make up for that. Oh yeah, look at this guy, best jet ski pilot in the world. I kind of had to stop and look for a minute at that, because I couldn't believe it had happened. I was like, wait, so you just started driving and immediately crashed? Now look where I am. I didn't know whether to respawn or run. I just didn't know what was happening. And luckily A started to kind of have an issue, so I was like, oh, I guess I'll run to A. Anyway, I'm going to wrap up and we'll talk a bit more about the game here just for the ending. But yeah, the first impressions of the game. It's a very, very important thing. And I think it's more important than it ever has been. When we now live in a world of such, massively saturated social media, when you have things like Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, every single person that plays that game now will have an opinion. Every single person now will put that opinion online and continue to voice it, not forgetting, of course, like massive forum threads and all of this kind of stuff. There are a million ways for people to put their opinion out there. Times were, when you look back like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, all right, of course, obviously we had some representation online, but really there wasn't. Most of the time when people got a game, they would play that game, and maybe they would write into a magazine or something like this, but there was really no way for the player base to really kind of voice their overall feeling about the game. You would kind of get it, and you'd, if you went to events or things like this, or you were just talking even amongst your friends, you could all kind of talk about it. And from a personal point of view, for sure, you may sort of feel like, hey, okay, I won't buy that game again, it didn't really work out for me. But there wasn't that same kind of like global sharing of information and sort of opinion out there. Whereas now, you can't afford it. You cannot afford to have a problem at release and just kind of be unaware of that, or sort of not take it seriously. I mean, I would imagine that there was no companies that would not take it seriously now. But really, what I'm saying is that it's a bigger issue than it ever was. You have to 100% deal with these things. You have to try and safeguard and not let it happen in the first place, because once the cat is out of the bag, it's too late. It's too late at that time. No amount of sort of fixing and backpedaling will solve the stigma that gets attached to the game and the issues that you're going to have thereafter, and the kind of impact that it will have on any other title that you produce at that time. It's just too significant. It really, really is. So I'm very interested to hear what you guys think about this, about first impressions of the game. Perhaps if you guys drop some impressions of other titles. One of my favourite examples of titles which at release kind of really crashed and burned is of course Haze. And people may remember Haze from a little while back. It was an FPS, and there was a massive amount of hype around Haze. It was in a lot of the sort of press, the gaming press at the time, loads of people talking about all sorts of exciting things to do with the game, and there was a very high expectation with Haze that it was going to be a very, very good title. It released, and it turned out that basically the game was nothing like what had been said, to a very significant degree. The gameplay and everything that was in it was nowhere near what had been stated, and that game absolutely bombed. I mean, we were talking within 2 or 3 weeks, not even that maybe, people weren't buying it, people weren't talking about it. It dropped down the playlist so fast you'd never even seen it. It was an absolute disaster, probably one of the worst releases I think I'd ever seen. And all of that came from the first release impressions. I don't even know whether that studio survived, I haven't looked up, but needless to say, the first impression, and anybody that picked up that game would never buy a game from that studio again, because it just was so off the map. And that is probably one of the best examples I could give of how important these releases are. On the other hand, okay, let's think about the positivity for a minute, right? If you have a sterling release, okay, first release, absolute quality product, it's just strength to strength. If you take the time to ensure that product is, or if you just get lucky and your product turns out to be an absolutely stellar first class release, everything that you post around there is going to be gold, okay? The DLCs, the titles that you bring up afterwards, you're going to attract amazing new talent for your studio, and all of these kind of things. So the first impression of a game is probably one of the most important things that you can do, and if you get it wrong, you will be burned for it for years to come. Thanks for watching today, guys. Hope you have enjoyed. Be sure to drop your thoughts below. Gonna have a lot more Battlefield 4 content as always coming up, not to mention the fact that of course Titanfall is on the way and there'll be content associated with that. I'm very curious, and I'm sure you all are, to see about that release. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.